بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. The next section is the prayer times. The author says, it is incumbent, that is highly recommended and encouraged, that one uphold the prayers at the beginning times in congregation. This is because the Prophet ﷺ emphasized that until he died, as well as is well known from the narrated traditions. The author says, each, that is obligatory, prayer has two times. The preferred time, this refers to the time that it is ideal to pray the obligatory prayer, and the author says the necessary time. This refers to the time after the preferred time that one must pray the time within. The author says the following. The preferred time for the noon prayer begins at the descent of the sun from its zenith. Its indication is the slanting of the shadow to the east after it has ended its shrinking. The end of its preferred time is when the shadow of something is like it in size from its slanting. The end of its preferred time is the beginning of the preferred time for the late noon prayer. The end of the late noon prayer time is when the shadow of something is twice its size. The preferred time of the sunset prayer begins when one can see a night star and ends when the reddish tinge of dawn disappears. The preferred time for the evening prayer begins at the point that ends after the first third of the night. The time for the dawn prayer begins when light starts to spread from the source to the Qibla and ends when one can perform one unit before sunrise. This information is clear and there is no need for explanation. The author continues by saying, the necessary time is what exceeds that is, it exceeds the preferred times. If one was to catch one unit for the dawn prayer before sunrise, one has caught the dawn prayer. If one were to catch one unit of the late noon prayer before sunset, one has caught it. One should not pray the necessary time unless there is a valid excuse, which will be discussed later, inshallah. In most cases, the supererogatory prayers or voluntary prayers are after the obligatory prayers except the dawn prayer. The supererogatory or voluntary prayer time for the dawn prayer is before it. One exception is if one prayed the dawn prayer and still had time to pray the supererogatory 2 units before sunrise. One can pray the supererogatory units after the dawn prayer. There are also supererogatory prayer times before the obligatory noon and afternoon prayers. The make-up times for the obligatory prayers are at any time. It is discouraged to pray the funeral prayer and any supererogatory prayer at 3 times, during sunrise, at sunset, and when the sun is at its zenith. However, at these 3 aforementioned times, if one must perform an obligatory prayer, one is obligated to perform the obligatory prayer during those times. The exception, of course, being when the sun is at its zenith, because there is no prayer prior to the sun passing the zenith. Related to the topic of prayer times is the joining or combining of the 2 prayers. By that we mean the joining of the prayer times for the noon and late noon prayers, as well as the joining of the sunset and evening prayer times. The late noon prayer cannot be joined with the sunset prayer, for example. According to Al-Azhar, it is permissible for the following to join the 2 prayer times: the sick, the traveler, even if the travel was in disobedience, like an escaped slave or disobedient wife, the one in the state of fear, and the one preoccupied with acts of obedience or permissible actions. Each one of these categories is permitted to pray both noon and afternoon prayers, for example, in the times of either. That is, such person can pray both prayers during the preferred or mandatory time for the noon prayer or the preferred or mandatory time for the late noon prayer. As for the sickness that permits one to combine the prayers, it refers to the occurrence of any pain in the body that is further accentuated at the prayer timings. It can refer to anything designated as an absolute illness, such as a fever and the like, or it can refer to something not referred to as an illness, such as anemia, tooth pain, or post-surgery pain. As for the fear that permits one to join the prayer times, it is the fear of harm for one's health or wealth. As for the preoccupation and acts of obedience which permit one to join the prayer times, this would refer to the occurrence of any type of admonition or reminder that would be missed if one were to pray during the preferred time. For example, if one attended a beneficial lecture on a religious instruction before the noon prayer and it carries over until the time of the late noon prayer, one would be permitted to attend the lecture and join the noon and late noon prayers together afterwards. This would also include acts such as building a mosque or watering pool, seeking proximity to Allah. As for the preoccupation and permissible acts, this includes things such as harvesting and work, and the like, which one does without necessarily seeking proximity to Allah. It would be permissible to join the prayer times in this case. As for that which constitutes travel, this will be discussed in the section on shortening the prayers, inshallah. According to the madhab, joining the prayer times during travel is a permissible dispensation or rukhsa. However, praying the prayers during their respective times is considered best and preferred. That is to say that if a traveler is able to comfortably pray the prayers in their preferred times, it is better and more meritorious to do so. The one combining the prayer times recites one call to prayer, adhan, and the pre-prayer call, iqama, before each prayer. That is, if one wanted to combine the noon and late noon prayers, one would call one adhan and two iqamas. One must also pray the combined prayers in their sequence. For example, one must pray the late noon prayer after the noon prayer and not vice versa. One is permitted to pray a voluntary or supererogatory prayer between the two combined prayers. That is, one can pray 2 units of a supererogatory prayer between the joined sunset and evening prayers if one likes. This is the case where the one prayed the both of them in the initial prayer time, that is the preferred time for the sunset prayer, for example, or the latter prayer time, that is the mandatory time for the evening prayer, for example. However, if there is only enough time for one to pray the 2 obligatory prayers before the mandatory time of the last prayer elapsed, one is to not pray any voluntary or supererogatory prayers.